Good morning. How are you today? Always liked starting conversations like that. I guess you can sort of see outside my window. You can definitely see the background. And it's been a while since I've gone live and figured, does it really matter when I go? I've got an appointment at 9:30, so I guess you can say I've got a couple of hours to kill. Maybe you do too. And whenever you decide to join me, thank you. People call me Schwartz. In broadcasting, it was the Schwartz, but in a talk format, is that really how you go? Not sure about that one. However, as everybody likes to qualify themselves in these things, I'm staring at a $20,000 piece of lambskin from formerly known as Ryerson Polytechnic University in the city of Toronto with a degree in radio and television. Now, does that mean I've been active in the field for all these years? No. My opinions aren't always exactly popular. Never really have been. That's something that a lot of friends and people say are endearing attributes at times, and others, let's just say, challenging. And I tend to play long game a lot, and I also tend to lean towards my father, who was a history major. And while I'm not exactly current on absolute citations, well, I guess it's best to start with those who cannot remember the past are condemned to repeat it. George Santayana, The Life of Reason, 1905, from the series of Great Ideas of Western Man. There. So we've paraphrased it a little bit over the years. Those who forget history are doomed to repeat it. But there you go. The origin dates back well over 100 years with this mantra, if you will. And we seem to have lost the plot. I wasn't really good with that term for a long time. So we seem to have lost the plot on that one. Because it, in and of itself, is historical. We're living in an era, and the reason I'm going to this video and in a longer format, because clearly my analytics say shorts are better for communicating with you, but this is such an issue that you gotta take to any platform you can, and since YouTube is my only platform now, well, you're stuck with me this way. Because I was reading something where there are now theatrical shows that are restricting audiences to just people of color, as they like to say in the parlance of their verbiage, and to avoid censorship and to potentially lose any algorithm whatsoever on YouTube. Because if you stumble across this, thank you. How is it that segregation has ended well in any context? How? Like, I'm 46 years old, so I've lived through some shit. Is that the way the kids still say it? Not to say that I stood there in Berlin while the wall came down. Not to say that I was present with mic in hand to report in a timely and accurate and truthful fashion when media held truth to a higher standard than first. It's never ended well. Ever. I can't recall a time where I can look back in history that we have been able to cite since the printing press, which I think is an appropriate way to start a conversation like this, because, yeah, you'll see my pajamas, and I really don't care how we frame this in real time at this point. I'm using a webcam, for crying out loud, and you're going to see the dude's shorts, and I don't care. But I digress. The printing press. we've been able to accurately, in a sense, share information, or at least consistently, for quite some time now. I mean, geez, look, I've already gone through the trouble finding out the accurate term of those who forget the past. But let's just find out the printing press. The printing press, a mechanical device for applying pressure and inked surfaces upon print, medium, invention date, 1440. Wow, that's a number that's going to stick out. Why haven't I known that number for quite some time? Is because I hate numbers. That's why you go into broadcasting. 1440. We've been able to repeat information in volumes for centuries now. And we have come to a point in 2024 where we can now resource this and access it immediately. I'm not using this, but when I'm out in public, I can go, oh, well, let me just look at that. When I'm in bed, I can do that. You can do that. And I know sometimes people try to cite sources and say, well, that's accurate. When you grew up having to read actual books, nah, you don't really get to go and say, oh no, this one's, it's a blog. History and resources have been pretty accurate for centuries. So we have books that have now been transcribed to this medium we have. So if you find accurate sources that can actually refute any of these points, I'm welcome to them. Most people who still welcome some degree of debate, and in Canada, that's going to get very difficult soon with the censorship laws coming along, but or at least the proposed ones, making people feel safe in these segregated theatrical performances that I read are happening with a theater show with Kit Harington, formerly Jon Snow, Game of Thrones fame, show that famously went off the rails. Maybe like this attempt at a podcast is going, but you don't want white people in there because they don't feel safe. But by what? This idea that we've adopted in recent history that there's this inherent racism amongst white people. You can't help it. So in a theatrical environment, you feel so threatened that you can't be in the same. I mean, really? Really? You're feeling so unsafe that what, you're going to get lynched after? You're going to find the hangman's noose strung over a street light in the main intersection of any city that you're in? I mean, really? Really? And that's what's troubling, because that's what the message is here with this now welcomed segregation, because people whose complexion they can't help either makes someone feel unsafe. Really? What action has there been that makes you feel genuinely unsafe when there's mixed groups of people in a room? Hell, there could be people from at least parts of Asia, because let's remember, as a continent, Russians look nothing like the Chinese. And there are varying degrees based on, again, things that people can't help because they grew up as an ethnicity throughout the Pacific Rim, whereas we say the sun rises in the east. Well, Japan itself is called the land of the rising sun. So by no fault of their own and through necessity and evolution, older than the printing press, you develop human characteristics to deal with your environments, hence eyes, skin tone. Same thing applies wherever you are. Can't help these things. But nope, no show, unless, of course, you are a person of color. Again, I'm playing by the rules because I don't want to get censored or lose the algorithm. And in Canada, we are again tabling a bill about online censorship and hate speech. What this government, our prime minister, invoked the Emergency Measures Act because he didn't like people and called them misogynist racists. I mean, look, if he's going to implement this online hate speech, I guess Canadians by default can then go, well, okay, can I call my lawyer about you now? I mean, as a Jewish person, I can really get away with it because, quite frankly, this prime minister has demonstratively shown since his leadership and being elected as leader of the country, because of course he was a member of parliament before that. Anyhow, he forgot Jews on his very first Holocaust Remembrance Day, and consistently, other than, oh, we'll acknowledge the St. Louis, which famously came to Canada's shores and was denied by our government through William Lyon Mackenzie King. Now I'm accurate with that. Used to cite a different prime minister, but now William Lyon Mackenzie King. None is too many. So sorry, Jews. Needless to point out, by the way, that the previous Conservative government did acknowledge Canada's wrongdoing in denying 900 Jews who were seeking refuge while the Holocaust was now well known amongst most people, at least in military terms. Yeah. Canada's history with Jews isn't outstanding. I am Jewish, a minority by every measure in this country, despite the fact that they go, well, I mean, you're the fourth largest population in the world outside of Israel. Yeah, 335,000 Jews in Canada. What does that say about how many Jews there are in the world? Never mind Canada. And this idea, again, because Jews were segregated in Canada. And, again, I got to correct myself. Beaches didn't say Goy, it was Gentile. Gentiles only. There were beaches in the United States. Gentiles only. And no words that can't describe the censorship possibilities of 1984 looming over you allowed either. We have all of this evidence readily available, again, right at the fingertips on devices like this. And, if I just want to switch tabs and go and say, those who forget, no, not the wording. It's those who cannot remember the past are condemned to repeat it. George Santayana, The Life of Reason, 1905, from the series Great Ideas of Western Man. That's why I've titled it as such here, because, of course, even I paraphrased it for years until I wanted to accurately cite it for this attempt at a podcast. And we're doing that in an era long past what you can even consider archaic, but still important, a benchmark in history, the printing press. Well, now we've got the internet, and pretty much anything that we've wanted to put the effort into transcribing onto this platform for the world to instantly access information, that we choose to ignore certain elements of it. Because you see, we do repeat these actions if we do ignore them. And I've never seen segregation pay off and go well. I mean, it starts to build resentment. People often talk about Trump right now, whom I've never liked, by the way. And he is the answer to this. Well, why is it like? Well, because you've become a bunch of intolerant and insufferable assholes. And I say asshole, by the way, because that is a universal biological feature of most animals that need to do the business, not to get too gross, but you know where I'm going there. So if anybody's offended by the fact that you can be an asshole, I got news for you. We all have them. So if there's an equal opportunity insult, it's to call someone an asshole. So I've been doing that for a long time. Little aside, somebody once said in the car, that's a woman. You can't call her an asshole. I'm like, does she have one? Well, yeah. Didn't really have much to say after that, now did they? Coming to a point, too, where I know for sure this law here in Canada to censor speech comes at a time here in Canada where we have a 50-year-old biologically born male competing with biologically female teens and getting dressed with them as well. I mean, that's the point we've reached, where somebody whose chronology, literal chronology, is no, I'm actually 13 and a girl. And this is somehow okay in Canada. But coming on here on this platform, where a second crack, by the way, at online censorship laws is being floored in Parliament now, and with the coalition government of the NDP that shares the exact same ideological values of our Prime Minister, who, by the way, again, and I will cite this history time and time again, when a member of Parliament Justin Trudeau is sitting in front of a national audience and a group of people that the CBC is hosting at the time. And this is before all legacy media got a big old influx and investment from the Canadian government recently. But the CBC has always been at the foot of the taxpayer and was asked point blank, is there a country other than Canada that you look at? Oh, China. I admire China. I think it was admire was the question directly. Sorry, I didn't have that fresh tab open. I am going to paraphrase a little bit, but it's still on YouTube, so you can go and look at it, where he openly admires China and its basic dictatorship. That's pretty much verbatim, by the way. Admiring China's basic dictatorship. Okay. That's not an alarm to anybody of any reasonable mind here in Canada. And by the way, I have previous videos of discussing reasonable limits on speech, by the way. So if you want to talk about existing laws and mechanisms we have in this country about speech, never mind online hate speech, we already have that mechanism. It's right there is clause number 1 in our Charter of Rights and Freedoms. So you can check out another podcast where I discuss that in a little more detail. So why do we have these ones? Well, because what? I mean, again, I can default to saying I'm Jewish, and I've forever seen online hate directed at Jewish people without any consequence. And from a prime minister historically who has forgotten about Jews or used it as a temporary virtue signal, because this climate of anti-Semitism isn't new. For nearly a decade of records now, the RCMP, the Ontario Provincial Police, which that's the province I live in at least, and even at municipal levels, have always had Jews as the most targeted group for religious hate crimes. And let me remind you that in terms of religions, Muslims in Canada are numbered as 1.7 million, right? That's a religion, and our census can legally ask you this question. I've had Americans ask, no, they can't. Oh, yeah, they can. Here in Canada, we have to fill this census out. It is not optional. Like, they'll show up to your house. Legit. So I know when I cite this number, because that's what I have to do, research my degree in radio and television, which has journalism involved in that. Well, 1.7 million practicing Muslims in Canada. I mean, look, I'm not a practicing Jew. I eat a lot of pork, and I eat bread during Passover. In fact, I haven't been to synagogue for religious worship in decades. I'm not exactly what you would call a practicing Jew culturally and from values and just, again, my identity and ethnicity. We happen to be an ethno-religion. I am Jewish. Can't help it either, by the way. Sorry. There was a crazy mustachioed guy whose book is a benefit of this centuries-old technology of the printing press. Of course, I'm talking about Mein Kampf, and his famous author being, I just don't want to say his name. That book's out, though. People still read it. People say, no, it should be on the shelf. That's a book that we shouldn't censor that one. Okay, well, I mean, if that's your bar, then I guess pretty much everything else. I mean, really? Then why learn from that history? Why not abide by the idea even that Jews are often the canary in the coal mine, as people like to say, when it comes to religious hate or any kind of hate? But Islamophobia, I'm sorry, I'm just not going to tolerate that term anymore, because quite frankly, when you're 1.8 billion people in the world, the second most practiced religion on the planet, and you keep crying that you're targets of hate, well, currently it's pretty easy to see in any major street You don't seem to feel that intimidated or feared when you're in the hundreds of thousands now, just marching weekly, sometimes daily, chanting genocidal songs against Jews. It's happening here in Canada too, by the thousands, maybe not hundreds of thousands, because we don't have the population size of, say, England. But that from the river to the sea on Big Ben is still something to behold in a Western democracy. They have different laws there, though, so I can't really speak with great accuracy to British hate crimes and laws. But it seems to me that any kind of reasonable Western democracy would have something maybe in place to say, hey, songs about genocide, not exactly on board with that. Here in Canada, you can seemingly get away with that in the streets, have for years. Trudeau hasn't done anything about it other than pay lip service when convenient. Again, that's where I think I kind of diverged a bit. But I can speak of it because I'm Jewish. I can't really speak to the experience of anybody who is Black because they're Black. I'm not. So I can't legitimately speak for their personal shared experiences, but it seems to me that the ideals of Martin Luther King have also been lost in this dynamic of repeating history. The ideal was held for quite some time that we should be judging people on the content of their character. And that's, again, displayed by their actions, right? Like, call someone a racist. Okay, well, how? Have I never hired somebody based on X, Y, or Z? No. Well, I mean, that's a biggie right there, right? And I tie employment to a human right in a lot of ways because that allows you to procure finances to procure basic human needs like food and shelter. That is a different discussion, really hot one. I actually stepped on that landmine, but nobody's commenting. And again, I know this isn't my most accessible platform at the moment, but hey, if you're tuning in, you subscribe, you check this out late, you want to join the discussion. I haven't even mentioned that, but there's been nobody there. I mean, I'll point that out. But nonetheless, everybody seems to share an opinion on YouTube. Maybe you'll find this. And if you do, and you have something to say, I will probably respond. And I'd like to keep things as factual as possible. Again, I'm talking about statistics here in Canada. Now, I haven't looked up what the Black population is in Canada. I can do that right now because the census allows for that. And according to that, well, our census says there are 1.5 million people who identify as Black in Canada. That accounts for 4.3% of Canada's total population. By the way, that's the census with the largest increase, 349,000 from 2016 to 2021. Wow, amazing what you can look up in real time with this technology and the laws that are in place in Canada that afford me the ability to look at that and go, wow, 1.5 million people in this country whose race is Black. Now, I have to say that 70% of the population in Canada is white, and they can't help that. Now, that's down by 2%. The Arab population, by the way, in Canada, 690,000, because we talk about ethnicities, right? If you want to be fair and accurate about that, well, look no further. The census is right there. That is as current as it gets with history. And it's 2024. I mean, that's a theme I wanted to touch on. And I do have some notes here because I do tend to diverge a lot, but I like to rein everything in and try and encompass this theme, especially pertaining to Canada. Because a lot of people in America talk about Canada, but very few people talk about Canada in Canada. And in my estimation, not quite as accurately as they could. I mean, look, Bills C-18 and C-11 are jokes. When it comes to access to information, broadcasting news, under the guise of protecting Canadian identity, like CanCon to the nth degree, where there's more oversight from the CRTC, like, give me a break. And make it was an extortion racket, in my opinion. They built $100 million out of Google. Whereas I cited that Australia settled for like $1. And Australia, by the way, not that much smaller than Canada. Canada's population is 36 million. Yet this tiny country with this leader that has openly admired the basic dictatorship of China ever since a microphone's been put in front of his face, it's undeniable. And that is history. That's documented history. That's something that if you wanted to distract yourself and go, I'm tired of this guy talking, he's full of shit. And you go and look it up on YouTube and you're like, oh, he wasn't full of shit. How do you not see that coming though? Because anybody who is going to admire such a dictatorship and then become your leader, it's kind of written out pretty clearly how they're going to govern you. This has been a red flag, literally, with yellow stars for a very long time. Yet people chose to ignore it. But it's not something you should ignore because, again, according to the title of this very podcast, those who cannot remember the past are condemned to repeat it. George Santayana, The Life of Reason, 1905. I should really read that series from the looks of things. Something I didn't read. Oh no, I didn't know something. Okay, so I'll learn more. Something you're capable of doing, right? If you're going to make a comment, go right ahead. Comment. I welcome them. If you're going to talk about the facts or bring up history, okay, we can discuss it together. And you know what? We can instantly look things up to support claims made. You need to provide accurate evidence. Well, I thought this was funny, by the way. The other day, I saw Encyclopedia Britannica cited. Back in the day, you were not allowed to cite an encyclopedia. When you were in school back in the 80s, you could not cite Encyclopedia Britannica. It would be like, Mr. Schwartz, you can't hand this paper in with that footnote. Sorry. You're going to have to rewrite this whole thing. And then you spend the entire evening, I already spent last night doing this. But you got to cite with accuracy. That was something that we were taught, something that's lost. Something that's, well, I got to be first. Well, sometimes even when you're first, you can correct yourself. I have multiple times already, and I'm only a half an hour into this. I've remembered things from my past videos, and I go, I'm not sure if that was right. And you can do that yourself and correct yourself. In fact, you should feel obligated to do that. But when you can't refute something, it becomes really difficult then to have the discussion. And that's why I do default to Martin Luther King and judging people by the content of their character, not the color of their skin. Really, I've not been convinced of anything to say that that moral compass is not pointed in the right direction. No, that's pointed in the wrong direction there. I don't know. I really don't care about that person's skin color. I really don't care who they sleep with. I just care, hey, are we going to get along in the workplace if that's our environment? Yeah, all right. Hockey team? You a cancer in the dressing room? No? All right. And look, I can be a pain in the ass. I know that's probably cost me some teams in my past. And I'm really hard on myself. Doesn't make it any easier for teammates. Like, hey, get up. This is a message I got from a couple of guys I really look up to. And I try to do that. It's been really hard the last while. I'm not trying to tie it in directly, but you know, you have this live stream of consciousness quite literally. And yeah, you got to get up every once in a while. Not even every once in a while. You got to get up. It's been a while since I've done any of these videos. And again, demonstratively long form doesn't work so well for me yet. Maybe you'll pick up on this. Maybe you'll share it. Maybe you'll go, wait, a Canadian is talking like this and about this? Yes. And doing it without saying every other word or like out of context, because Mr. Bowles would be very disappointed in me. Grade 10 media, Thornley Secondary School, led me down this treacherous path of this obligation to acknowledge truth. You do that through history. And that's something we're deliberately ignoring these days. And the consequences are laid bare. I said earlier, I didn't have this one right. We've lost the plot now. We're segregating theatrical performances. Kit Harington, formerly Jon Snow, has some theatrical performances now. No white people in this one. Nope, no white tickets. Sorry. You're making other people uncomfortable. What? Uncomfortable what? By the presence of a white person just being there, who in that environment and country can't control the color of their skin and, oh yeah, their ethnicity to the land and historical ties to it. Oh no, there's a lot of white people in Britain. Who would have known? Although that demographic's changing significantly in a lot of European countries, but here in Canada too, demonstratively it is. Now, I cited earlier that Black people are 1.5 million. I'm not saying, oh no more. I mean, come on. That's ridiculous. There are a lot of multiple generational families that happen to be Black in Canada. And if we're welcoming more people who are from African nations, because there are multiples, where they're facing legitimate genocide, by the way. The Sudan, not exactly somewhere I'm going to be vacationing to. I doubt you are either. Or Nigeria, where there's thousands of Christians being slaughtered by Muslims. Now, I say that because that's the two competing religions, and well, you and I both know that they're not Arab in Nigeria. We have this real problem in the context of these conversations, by the way, of separating Islam as a religion and Arabs as a race. Now, it just so happens that a lot of Arabs happen to practice Islam. However, there are many Arabs who practice Catholicism, Christianity, Coptics, Druze, Baha'i, Judaism, perhaps a dab of Hinduism here and there, Buddhism. Again, Arabs are a race, 690,000 in Canada. And again, if you're going to abide by your country's laws and principles, the Charter of Rights and Freedoms set forth in 1981. I mean, really, it's a very young document. I'm older than the Charter of Rights and Freedoms in Canada, for crying out loud. In our very first clause, it discusses, again, in a previous podcast in long form, that clause number 1 can restrict your speech already, but the threshold's got to be high. And it's not as if we even learned from recent history where the Emergency Measures Act that was invoked didn't meet legal thresholds. A federal court ruled that. I know the federal government, my apologies, almost stumbled there, but the federal government wants to appeal it. You have the legal opportunity to do so, but I highly doubt that any legitimate judge will rule against a federal ruling already. That's where I'm a little confused. I know I talk about the law in some other videos, in life in general. I really enjoy the law. But if somebody wants to enlighten me on how a federal ruling can be overruled by another federal ruling, that's one I'm just a little confused about. So there, I mean, I don't know everything, but if you happen to know and want to comment, go ahead. You want to like and subscribe, go ahead and do so. Want to share? I welcome you to. Anybody who happens to catch on live, thank you for joining. I know it's just past 7 in the Eastern time zone, and that's probably where most subscribers are for me. But if you happen to be somewhere else in the world and you're tuning in and it's your time zone, thank you. Maybe you're learning something about Canada. Maybe you're going to explore more videos on this channel, which has a bunch of shorts, some things from my past in radio and hockey interviews that you'll see. There's other videos that I have stored away that I should probably upload, but I'm tremendously lazy when it comes to doing that. Bulk uploading. But that's my own shortcoming. I like to think that I'll share shortcomings with you if I'm wrong about something. I'd like for you to point it out. History, evidence, nothing wrong with looking up facts and sharing them objectively and acknowledging them objectively. That's what we really aspired to. That's what, to me, really encompassed what Martin Luther King so famously did say about judging people by the content of their character. What are their actions? What's wrong with that notion? And yeah, you might think, again, I'm drawing things that are not quite tied, but they are. This censorship nonsense here in Canada is getting pretty troublesome. Bill C-11 and C-18 already exist. They were passed. And now we have this online hate censorship law that's being tabled again. I thought for some reason, I was like, wait, didn't we already go through this? But they've refined the bill a little bit more, which Pierre Poilievre and the Conservative government will vote against. However, the coalition that used laws to maintain what is essentially now a majority government, and ideologically, we know that the NDP is going to stay in line with the Liberal government, which is why many Canadians cannot wait for 2025. We do have an election then. That is when it will happen for sure. Some people had a thought that Trudeau might step down as leader even of the Liberal Party. Really? This guy, this narcissist, this egomaniac? No. Megalomania, and pick your adjective here. And that's not hateful. It's fairly accurate. His actions and the way he goes about tabling laws and how he practices his governance, that's not in line with Canadians. But he's ignoring that. A lot of people use the boogeyman arguments that the Conservative government is somehow going to repeal laws that we've had in Canada now for more than 20 years. I mean, gay marriage has been something in Canada for quite some time. And I noted also that the Harper government, which is where everyone says, oh, but it's still Stephen Harper's Conservative Party. Well, ideologically speaking, then he would have abolished the opportunity for abortion, because apparently that's still a gray zone in Canada legally, and would have banned gay marriage. But he famously said, that's been the will of the people. My personal opinions are irrelevant to the matter. I'm not even going to table a law or try to repeal any laws about gay marriage in Canada. And he had a majority government, as far as I recall, if my year is correct, 2011. There was a majority government for the Conservatives. So they could have very well tabled something to outlaw gay marriage and would have passed. But they didn't. Poilievre just sits there and goes, well, I believe in the chronology of age and that a 50-year-old man doesn't have the right to compete with teenage girls in swimming and get dressed with them. That's not a right. And you know what? A lot of Canadians agree with that. And a lot of people who are, I think, a silent majority are starting to express those views. There's obviously concerns about cancellation, and here in Canada, acutely, online censorship. So that actually has been a bit of a impetus for sharing this too, because quite honestly, I don't see where it's hateful to say that when people like myself, or because again, it's not all about me. There are other people out there go, well, I mean, if you want to compete in sports, then all right, we'll have an open division then. Both trans men and women competing, how you feel in this particular category that you want to compete in, and that's fine. But there are spaces for very legitimate reasons that women even express now. And oh, no. What do you know about being a woman? Again, I said it earlier. You can't help your skin complexion, right? Your race. You can't. and certain physiological developments of evolution that carried through your DNA. Well, same goes for your gonads and gametes. Sorry, can't do anything about them. Just can't. And you can't do anything about your aging either. I mean, back in the day, 20 years ago, I couldn't even grow a beard. I had these horrible bald patches. Now, a little salt and pepper in there. I can't help that. And I'm not going to hide it either. But somehow, we're in an era of from 1981 where our Charter of Rights and Freedoms pretty much said any reasonable government. I'm going to paraphrase because it's a pretty lengthy one. It's in fine print. It's hard to read. And I have another video on it. I've cited it before, so you can look on there after. We already have a law in place. Use it, but use it wisely. That's what it was there for. That's what our precedent, at least when it comes to the most recent imposing of federal laws illegally, and it was the Emergency Measures Act. Federal court ruled against our government for invoking it. It did not meet the threshold. There was no legal right to freeze bank accounts. There was no legal right under the guise of shutting the protest down for the reasons they did. I mean, if anything, they were guilty again of not really having a permit. But any injunction they cooperated with through municipal bylaw enforcement. I've cited that one before. You didn't need the Emergency Measures Act for honking. Doesn't matter how many trucks there were. There were noise complaint violations that you could enforce, and they did. And guess what happened? The horns stopped after 11 p.m., and legally they could go from 7 to 11. That's the law. Yet here we are, trying to retool what's already there, and for decades has worked effectively enough because we used to abide by, again, judging by actions and character and things that we can't help. If people are going to sit there and say, well, I can't help my skin color, well, neither can I. I can't help the fact that I'm Jewish. I can't help the fact that the census says, look, there are 1.5 million Black people in Canada. Great. There are 25 million that are white. Can't help that. 70% of Canada is white. You're going to be uncomfortable everywhere you go. You think you would have been outnumbered by now. You think you would have felt undue harm by now. But no, you don't. Not here in Canada. Your version of undue harm, though, in today's parlance is you're not allowed to compete in a sport. Guess what? I don't think there are a whole lot of high-profile Jewish goalies in the National Hockey League. Do you think I have any merit whatsoever in my claim that I should be in the National Hockey League? No. I'm a pretty decent goaltender. I've got some decent accomplishments under my belt. Am I a capable emergency backup training goalie for guys who have played and do play? Yeah. But I'm not about to sit here and say, so where's my tryout? I've said that many a time in my life. I have no right to be playing in the National Hockey League. In fact, I have no right to be playing in any sport unless I earn the opportunity. That's what sport has taught me. That's what hockey has taught me. You earn things, the means of which involve your character as well. You learn that along the way too. Are you coachable? Are you a dressing room cancer? But I digress. What would I know about that? What would I know about history or television or broadcasting whatsoever? I don't know. I do have a degree in it, though. It's important, again, to cite these things because people are, what do you know about these things? What authority do you have? Well, let me tell you. I graduated from the once prestigious radio and television arts program from Ryerson's Polytechnic University in the year 2000. Have I had a meaningful employment in the field throughout that history since? No, I have not, but that is the truth. My credibility, once called into question, can see how and why it should have. I haven't committed that offense in a very long time. Although I do get excited about certain projects, maybe prematurely, but I didn't sign agreements. And well, when you think you're clever, sometimes you're not. And I wasn't. That cost me a job at the Score through drafting. That's one of my major citations in history, by the way. If you were to ever look me up, you'll see that. Who is this guy? Oh, there's that. Not exactly my proudest. But I've learned from that. You learn from history. You're supposed to, at least. And it's cost me a lot in that endeavor. So yeah, it's a bit of a sore spot. But something I did to myself. I got to be accountable for it. Try to be accountable to you when you watch. If it happens to be after the stream is over and you add a comment later on, I don't restrict that. If anything does get censored, it is by YouTube's algorithm, not mine. And then I review it and go, no, it actually is probably a good idea that that's censored. If it's a shot at me, I mean, okay, whatever, but not worth you publishing it and looking that foolish and maybe falling prey to our new censorship laws in Canada. Maybe I'm protecting you indirectly. You know what? It's actually kind of interesting. I look at the time. I look at how, again, the YouTube algorithm and analytics tell me that long form videos aren't exactly what is consumed most by your audience. And I know we didn't advertise this or schedule it or alert any subscribers, but when thought comes to mind, you write it down on cue cards, old school. Here you go. That's what an index card used to look like, kind of in the library. You see. We ignore past progress. Just a couple of notes to stay on track with you this morning and to stay on the roundabout point. Cited from The Life of Reason in 1905 from the series Great Ideas of Western Man, George Santayana. Those who cannot remember the past are condemned to repeat it. We've paraphrased it a lot over the years, haven't we? But you and I can now cite it properly. I just hope that our actions and character will eventually come through and we get back to the ideal that we judge the individual on the content of their character and their actions. And that if we acknowledge that we can't help our skin color, we can't. We can choose how we practice a religion. We cannot choose our sexuality. We've accepted that as objective science and truth and has no bearing on how one person loves another and how they should marry or conduct their private lives. Same even applies to every letter in that ever changing alphabet and flag. For a long time, it stayed one flag and no one cared who you bedded and who you ended up marrying. It's been decades in Canada that no one's cared now. But here we are with this censorship law on the horizon again. So I'll leave you with that today. I will not go on for more than an hour. Never mind 2. So I know nobody caught this live. That's fair. I didn't schedule it. Don't have a huge audience. But if you're catching this later and again want to comment, share it, like and subscribe, I appreciate that. So thank you for joining me. And until the next time, may the Schwartz be with you.